Welcome to KBcast, the podcast for security executives, interviewing people from around the globe on how organizations can operate smarter and stay safer. Here's Carissa Breen.
I sat down with Dave Maunsell from Haventec and we discussed his opinion around privacy, that not enough current technologies are providing adequate protection towards sensitive information. Dave discusses changing the conversation between multinationals adopting startup technologies and how certain companies should look to incorporate innovative tech startup businesses to increase their existing capability. If you're keen to learn a little bit more about what Dave has to say, then this episode is for you, and please keep on listening. Okay, so Dave, we spoke initially. I was really interested in what you were doing and what Haventec were doing in the identity space. And I think it's an area that I'd like to put some focus on because it's becoming highly relevant with everything that's happening today, even more so. So I'm really keen to dive on into your thoughts in this space and how it's evolving. But before we do that, we always like to start our podcast off with talking about you and your journey. So can you walk our listeners through about your career and how you ended up doing what you're doing?
I sure can. So I've spent probably the better part of the last 30 or so years in what could be described as a technology career. From an Australian perspective, I actually started at the Australian Stock Exchange back in the mid-90s when it was initially connecting to the internet, and I occupied a number of roles there, including leading their internet and information security team. Following time at the ASX, I spent then the better part of the next 20 years or so at Accenture, and most of that time with financial services clients who in one form or another were connecting parts of their enterprise to the internet. I also led Accenture's digital business here in Australia and New Zealand for a number of years. Most recently, since 2019, I've taken on the CEO opportunity at an Australian cyber startup called Haventec.
Okay, and how do you feel about transitioning from more of an enterprise into a startup perspective?
That's a great question. I did it because I didn't know if I could do it. I like, from a career perspective, I like challenges that I am unsure of my own abilities to be successful in that space. Have a look at my transition from the stock exchange to management consulting, and from what was essentially management consulting to now startup. If I go back to each of those moments that got me thinking about the change, each of those are characterized by a personal uncertainty about my ability to be successful, and the only way you know is by going and doing. And I didn't at the start of the exercise when I ultimately ended up joining Haventec know if I had the skills, the capabilities, the experience to bring all of the moving parts together in a way that's going to help the organisation grow, which is why I wanted to do it.
No, you're absolutely correct. And I think a lot of people ask me this question as well. And I think it's something that until you experience it firsthand, it's hard to understand what really happens in the startup space. But I know from our discussions that we've had, you mentioned that current technologies are not really providing adequate protection of privacy to sensitive information. So can you talk to me about why this is happening?
Well, this particular moment in time is, with the pandemic that's going on at the moment. But even before that, you would characterize certainly the last 10 or so years have been an era of truly remarkable change. I mean, we're seeing industries and enterprises that have been transformed by new technologies. The incumbents, the traditional businesses that occupied a large part of the market, they're being disrupted. And the organizations that are coming in and disrupting those markets, they're not only disrupting, but they're redefining them, and they're transforming the set of customers' expectations that are serviced by that market. Mary Meeker, in her Internet Trends report last year, highlighted the fact that now more than half the world's population is now online, and many of the organizations that are seeking to remain relevant to their markets, whether they're called a disruptor or an incumbent, they're really looking to digital technology as a means to underpin both access to and meaningful engagement with their markets.
Mm-hmm.
So this, you take that, lots of change occurring. You've got rapidly expanding connectivity, and that rapidly expanding connectivity is allowing, both incumbents to defend their marketplace, new business opportunities for new entrants to the marketplace, but it's also amplifying, the impact that, for want of a better term, bad actors from both inside and outside organisations are having on particular markets. We're seeing increasing sophistication and frequency of cyber attacks on many organisations. It's very easy to see what's going on. You type in data breach into your search engine, and there'll be a new article from today. And in actual fact, if you type it in today, Amtrak are in the process of reporting a data breach. A couple of days ago, there's an article about somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So you take that point, you take the frequency, you also take the fact that many people now are working in complex organizations that are data rich, that are connected to the internet and other public networks. And basic human error is also exposing sensitive information to individuals, enterprises that aren't explicitly supposed to have access to that information.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of the key point, that more and more businesses are moving more of their engagement into a for want of a better term, a digital form. But this is also highlighting the fact that the foundations on which they are doing that are not protecting sensitive information, digital identities and data.
So you mentioned before about incumbent technologies. So if these players out there are not really working and they're not doing what they say they're doing, why are people not objecting to it or completely outraged by purchasing products that are supposed to do something and then don't? How come there's not more sort of people speaking publicly about this type of behaviour?
Well, and I do want to be clear that while the data points as it relates to that particular statement about the fact that things aren't working at the moment, I'm using the frequency of breaches and the size of breaches as a means of demonstrating that things aren't working at the moment. But a lot of the technology that is in place now, a lot of the architectures that are in place now, they are responding to the market and the attack vectors of bad actors that are looking to do damage, and they are slowing things down. They're definitely slowing things down, but we haven't come up with the magic means by which you go about ultimately stopping that information from being stolen or misused, and that's the key point. So technology, the technology marketplace has continued to respond to the needs of the market, but they haven't quite yet cracked the code of ultimately delivering what we're after, which is our basic human right to privacy.
When you spoke earlier, you mentioned that things are sort of slowing down. What do you think the reasoning is for this?
Just so I'm clear on that particular point. So strategies and technologies that organisations that are connected to the internet, that they're putting in place to defend sensitive data, they're working. They are slowing down the impact of cyber and other threats on that core data set. The challenge with that approach to defending sensitive information is ultimately not delivering the outcome that many humans are after, which is, I don't want you to defend my data, I want you to protect it. And that's the key. That's the key point. If I'm handing over sensitive information about myself, my family, especially non-transient, I don't want that enterprise to come back to and say we're going to work really hard to defend that data. I want to know that if I'm sharing that information with them, that they're going to protect that information from all sorts of threats, both inside and outside of the organisation.
Okay, let's talk about like startups sort of moving into this space, as you alluded to in the start of our conversation, and those startups deploying their product. So I'm really keen to sort of get your insight in terms of multinationals trusting startups. And what I mean by that statement is that startups, a lot of them have the solution out there, but they're being overlooked because they haven't been around for 20 years. And part of a procurement process in a large corporation, they require these types of documentation. So I'm just really keen to hear your thoughts on that, on what your advice would be.
So advice to startups, predominantly informed by the benefits of the work I've done with the Haventec business over the past 12 or so months, is at the core of any of these startups is an insanely good idea that people are looking to bring to life to make life easier for those people that interact with that new business, or bring something to market that customers will love. Often in that journey, whether it's building a product or building some software, sometimes you might lose sight of ultimately how you're going to now take your product into the marketplace. Here you're essentially going to go to market with that idea to scale the business that's going to not only help you, deliver on the original purpose for setting the startup, but also capture parts of the market that maybe some competition already, or somebody that competes in your ecosystem already exists in. So knowing where you differentiate from the competition, and knowing how you differentiate in the context of the customers that you are ultimately seeking to serve, to surprise, to delight, that becomes really important, certainly as it relates to the means by which you go about introducing your idea to new potential customers. For us, and there's a great question on the procurement process, because we've spent 3 years building the platform, a year validating that with select clients, and we're just in the process now of introducing ourselves and the outcomes that we can deliver for an enterprise to organizations. And when we do get introduced into a procurement process, spending time educating them on how we go about doing what we do, and compared to my previous experience, disproportionately more than I originally thought. But going in with the expectation that you do need to spend some time, if you're bringing a new idea to marketplace that does something transformatively different, that delivers outcomes that has eluded the market up until this particular point, you are going to also need to prove that you can do what your product claims it can do. And that's times one of the things you're going to need, as well as the ability to educate an audience. And in our instance, not only a technically literate audience, but a risk literate audience, as well as in some instances a board level audience. And spending time perfecting that, with the benefit of hindsight, I possibly should have been more patient, but I would certainly encourage any startup to do. Two other final points as well. If the core of the business is around some ideas that don't exist, I would encourage you to, while you're starting to establish the business and building it out, if there is IP or patents that form the basis of your proposition or product or solution, I would invest in protecting them. You're expending a lot of value and time and so forth to bring that idea to life, and you do want to protect that idea if it's unique and predictable. And then, and often easier said than done, if you're entering into a marketplace where there are some competitors already because they deliver something similar to yourself, want to figure out a way of competing on your terms and not on theirs, and that can be quite tough, but is certainly worthwhile pursuing, because you want to take the fight from them and bring it to you.
I completely agree with a lot of your points that you made there, and I think that that's highly relevant because a lot of innovation is created in Australia, and it'd be good to see a lot of these startups actually leading the way in this space. So, Dave, from our chats, you sort of mentioned to me that people need to be focusing their attention on data and identity. So can you walk me through what you mean specifically by this statement?
Yeah. So, up until this particular point, global economies have been able to thrive based on the existence of trust between people or transactors in an exchange. And, the future of the open enterprise, open government is really going to be heavily dependent on the existence of digital trust. And whatever literature you come across, the key foundations for that are your digital identity and the data associated with it. And the fact that we haven't yet come up with the means by which we can protect that information means that we haven't resolved what is essentially a real challenge facing the digital world. I mean, the flip to Mary Meeker's report from last year as well, over 50% of the planet are now connected. Now there's still 48% that aren't, and if we don't get to a means by which people can go and confidently digitally connect, we are missing an opportunity to get all of the benefit associated with this, with the increased connectivity that ultimately the internet affords. So the core digital stakeholders, consumers, enterprises, and regulators, they're all seeking an inherent solution to the weaknesses of the current digital trust model, which is protecting digital identity and data. We strongly believe that addressing the weaknesses will require some rethinking as it relates to the foundations of digital trust, revisiting the need to centrally store sensitive data, changing the way applications interact with that data, changing the way individuals, the enterprise and third parties access that data, and providing individuals with more granular control over how their personal information is used and shared. We think that's going to be really important as we head into an era of even more digital connectivity, even more digital interactions, and potentially, and I don't have any better information as to what the future holds here than anyone else off the back of this particular moment, but you would argue that this digital technologies will play an even more important role in keeping a distributed, connected workforce efficient, which will have even more things going on, even more sensitive information now being shared between workforces that are remote.
Now, the other thing I'd like to ask you about, because you touched on consumers there, and as you're probably well aware that people nowadays are prepared to give everything away for convenience. So do you think, and just based on what you said, because we do have a lot more digital connectivity and what's happening in our world and where we're headed, will this sort of be the new norm? And if so, how do you believe consumers can get their power back, and if they can?
When you say new norm, are you talking about what could be described as the blind acceptance of the set of terms and conditions associated with many websites you sign up to?
Websites, applications, and just people being probably naive or just perhaps not aware of what that actually means if they give their information away?
Certainly as it relates to digital interactions that customers are having, and often in that sign-up process being asked to sign up to a set of terms and conditions, some of which, if you read them, you might think twice about them. I think what many organisations are demonstrating at the moment is that most of humanity actually will sign up to these terms and conditions, and they are putting a level of trust, especially as it relates to the more sensitive information they're sharing about themselves on these platforms, to ultimately deliver to any protections that are ultimately somewhat afforded by the terms and conditions they're signing up to. But the flip is that humanity also likes convenient solutions, and when you are presented with a long set of terms and conditions, there's a lot of research out there about many people not reading that information, just clicking OK and moving on. I think the society's response to that particular point, I'm not sure it's going to come through a wholesale change in human behaviour. I think what it feels like society's key responses to that particular situation is where people are signing up to terms and conditions and they're not delivering on their customers' right to privacy or the protection of sensitive information. The society is responding with regulation by sanction for breach. That seems to be what's going on at the moment, where you see many jurisdictions, California, Europe, and even here in Australia, introducing new privacy protections over industries or jurisdictions that certain organisations look after. And it feels like that's the primary response to that society's taking at the moment to ensuring that, that people as part of the sign-on process and that are accepting the terms and conditions that they're being asked to use the service, or the conditions on which they're asked to use the service, that we're relying on. Do I think that's the long-term goal, or the end state? No, I think we're starting to see the emergence of more granular consent processes being presented to customers in a process or a moment, especially in health. And we're working with on a government initiative at the moment where we are seeking to orchestrate the electronic consent from a customer within a digital interaction with a series of terms and conditions to proceed down a particular health route. And you could imagine in the future that model of securing explicit granular consent from a customer as it relates to the set of terms and conditions for them to proceed to the next step, whether it be treatment or research, will be something that emerges that does start to engage the customer in a dialogue around ultimately what they're signing up for or what they're signing up to happen next. We see that more as a target state. I also get the sense, and even though it's early days, but some of the protections that have been afforded to some of the larger big tech organisations with legislation in the States, it feels like that's starting to be clawed back a little bit. And if some of the platform providers have more explicit responsibility not only for the contents within their platform, but the privacy related to the customers using their platform, that we may see some more behavioural changes within enterprises that are offering these services.
Would you say it's a fair assumption if someone, so let's say a non-tech or a non-security person or someone from a privacy background were to read the terms, do you still think that even if they read it, they probably might not quite comprehend what those terms mean anyway?
Am I judging humanity? What am I judging humanity by? This my response.
What I mean by that is perhaps reading terms and conditions can be worded in a way where it can come across very convoluted, and I think perhaps maybe these companies can word things in a way that people can make sense of, perhaps in terms of the terminology and the language used.
Yeah, it's a great question, and also back to a certain extent, a couple of messages that we started this conversation with. You'll find a lot of technology in this space ultimately ends up being technology solutions designed by technologists for probably technology problems. And certainly terms and conditions, when you read them, it feels like legal solutions to what are essentially legal problems written in legal terms. I think the organisations that are going to be able to differentiate themselves, to work with the regulation and the legislation that sits over their business and their customers, those that are going to be able to deliver on human outcomes with human terms. They're ultimately where our business is focused, and where I think many of our clients that we're dealing with at the moment, that we will encourage them to head towards, because we need to be providing things that are relevant to humans, that they understand, that are convenient to use, that don't infringe their rights, especially their right to privacy. We think that innovations out of the Australian market can help deliver on putting the human back at the centre of this experience in a way that doesn't confuse them, that doesn't have them, blindly accepting terms of use that ultimately, give away information about themselves, and the ability to properly scrutinise what they're signing up to. So the long, short, the fact that many of these terms and conditions are so long is worrying enough, because there must be something in there hiding that maybe some of the organisations that are putting these terms and conditions out don't really want us understanding.
Oh, exactly. And that's what I was sort of asking the question, because unless you're perhaps a lawyer reading that word by word, perhaps I would say majority of people would not understand it. It's all too hard. Couldn't be bothered. I want to get this application on my phone, for example, TikTok, and I'm just going to accept whatever's there because other people are utilizing it. And that means that it may be okay. So that's what I meant earlier around the convenience side of things, that they couldn't be bothered going through it. And even if they did go through it, would they necessarily understand at a fundamental level what that meant for their identity, for their privacy? I don't think so. And I think that perhaps in terms of the onus being put back on these providers, but to word it in a way that makes sense for people to actually understand what they're getting themselves into, or perhaps not getting themselves into.
And again, look, it's a hypothetical question, but I'll put it out there because it may get somewhat to the core of this. If there's two social platforms you're looking to sign up to, and one of them has 30 pages of terms and conditions that you need to click OK for, and another one has we will not lose your digital identity and not share it with anyone. We will not lose your data and not share it with anyone. If you want to share your data with somebody, we will allow you to do that. If you want to remove that sharing, we will allow you to do that. I would certainly personally, I would head towards the social platform that left me in control, and one that I felt that was taking me as an individual, protecting information about me, as opposed to the other one that's possibly not disclosing everything clearly as to what they're going to do with my digital fingerprints as I leave them over their platform.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. I think that's a really good way of putting it. So I'd like to sort of just move on to our sort of last part of our interview and just talk to me about your thoughts on the future state in the identity space, and perhaps maybe just touch on what you guys at Haventec are doing about this.
Yeah, so look, great question. I've touched on this a couple of times during the course of our discussion. I do think we're in the identity space. You want to get back to a suite of designing solutions that put the customer at the center of the experience, not the technology team that's building it, but the customer. And for us, it's about delivering on two things. It's about delivering on convenience and delivering on privacy. We think they're going to be important features, components, whatever you want to call it, of the technology that's ultimately going to find favor with customers in the future. Certainly those that are interested in doing more digital engagement, because convenience is going to play a role, but ultimately doing that with the confidence that they know that information about themselves is not being shared with others who shouldn't have it or cannot be stolen. We think they're going to be really important. So technologies that put human back at the center of the experience, we think is going to be insanely important in the identity space. Back to this convenience and privacy piece, the reason why we feel quite strongly that that's the target state for many of the experiences, because the means by which many organizations are going about digital identifying their customers and confirming they are who they say they are, whether it be through a multi-factor experience, like closing the loop via a phone or another device, or enforcing a long, difficult to remember password. We don't think, from certainly the research that we've had access to, that humans will continue to gravitate en masse to digital experiences that make it more and more difficult to sign on to. In actual fact, you see it somewhat in the data sets that comes out from some of the password compromise sites at the moment. Is the vast majority of people reuse their passwords, which would suggest that when they're using their digital assets, that they're definitely interested in convenience. Knowing that people do want a simple means by which they can go about getting access to these digital services, having that front and center of the experiences you put in the marketplace, we think it's going to be insanely important. But doing that in a way which is part of the challenge, but also, the core of the Haventec proposition, putting a convenient means by which a customer can digitally identify themselves in a way that does not compromise their security, that ensures that when the enterprise is breached or the cloud is breached, that those digital identities can't be stolen. We feel that is a target state, certainly in the identity space, is going to be really important. And the convenience, whether it's passwordless or PIN or biometric, we also feel quite strongly that should be a customer choice. You should, as the customer, confirm the convenient means by which you go about digitally identifying yourself. We feel that organisations that are offering that choice to their customers, again on foundations that deliver on the privacy proposition, will play a key role in helping organisations and enterprises acquire their digital customers and keep them engaged with the digital experiences they're putting out into the marketplace, because they're easy to interact with, and you can do that in a way that you feel confident that that organisation is there servicing you, not selling your data to somebody else, or not storing your data in a way that is high risk and at risk of being stolen or used by someone that shouldn't have access to it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, Dave, I really appreciate your time in talking about your knowledge and experience in this space. If people perhaps wanted to ask you a question because I didn't ask you a particular question that they really want to get the answer to, how can people go about reaching out to you?
So if anyone is interested in finding more about Haventec, you can follow our Haventec LinkedIn site. So just search for Haventec on LinkedIn. We're sharing a lot of information about the products, what our solutions do, as well as the means by which of engaging with myself and the team. If you do want to get in touch also with us, you connect to haventec.com. There is a contact us drop down. Put your details in there. If you have a question you'd like, we'll respond quickly and look forward to talking to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Dave. I really do appreciate the insight that you've given our listeners today.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to share it with them.
Thanks for tuning in. As always, we hope you got some new ideas or ways of thinking from this episode. And remember, you can always reach out to our guests if you do have more questions. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, and we always love to hear your feedback. So leave a review on iTunes and we might just give you a shout out on a future episode. You can find me on LinkedIn as well as on @IamCarissaBreen on Twitter and Instagram. And if you'd like to know more about how we help tech companies, check out carissabreenindustries.com. Until next time, stay safer.